All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is talking about any class ones. Kevin, do we have anything to be brought before the board today?
No class ones for this meeting.
What about class two and class tens?
Sure. Okay, since our last board meeting, these are the permits that have been issued and the classifications. Matheson Tri-Gas out of Texarkana, Class 3. Ozark View RV Park in Omaha, Arkansas, Class 3. Southeast Feed in DeQueen, Arkansas, Class 3. New Hope One Stop in New Hope, Arkansas, Class 3. Leslie and Sons, Class 5 out of Kilgore, Texas. Southeastern Tank Lines out of Dublin, Georgia, Class 5. Arkansas Liquefied out of Boonville, Class 5. And Coastal Energy Corporation out of Willow Springs, Missouri, Class 8. Those are the permits that have been issued since the last board meeting.
I suppose everything's in order. All the fees have been paid.
Yep, everything is good to go there, and those do not require any kind of a motion or anything from the board. We also have a couple of territory expansions. I'd like to share that information with the board, Chair, if that's good.
Yes, sir.
Anderson Gas and Propane out of Bergman. They applied for Faulkner County, Union County, and White County. And Arkansas Liquefied out of Boonville applied for Johnson County. And that takes care of the permits and territory expansions from since the last meeting.
Okay. Any other issues with those permits that we need to go over?
Not that I'm aware of. They're good.
Okay. Well, moving on down the list, we have a few representatives from I don't know who all's there or who all's present, Kevin, but I know that we have several that to ask the board for some considerations with dealing with 420-pound cylinders. Do we have the representative from SunGas there today?
I don't believe so. Jim Burcham had requested to be before the board, and so we had them down on the agenda. But I believe that he had a funeral. I don't know if it was family or close friend. So they're not with us. However, we do have Jack Worley with Ozark with us to speak on the same topic.
Okay, Mr. Worley, thank you for coming today. And would you mind coming before the board, or Kevin, you want him up like closer
Yep.
to the front?
No, he's taking the chair now.
Okay. Just tell them who you are and why you're here.
Well, my name's Jack Worley and I work for Ozark Mountain Propane in Garfield. And I'm their, I guess, service coordinator, the whole company pretty much. And I deal a lot with the 420s and tank sets and that end of the spectrum as far as propane goes. So I was just wanting to bring up the need for inspecting these tank sets. It's a long and drawn out process to get these applications in and inspected. And I was hoping we could just adopt NFPA 58 as far as a standard for getting these propane tanks set out in the field.
All right, and I just want to make sure that was everybody able to hear Jack, what he was saying?
Not real well, no.
I think you got to act like you're mad.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
And that'll make sure that the board can hear what you got to say.
Yeah, I was just, I'd like to see if we can change the regulations on setting 420-pound cylinders.
Closer to the, get closer to the mic.
Hey, do you see how loud I'm talking?
Yeah, I see how loud it
All
is.
right, we'll be above that. There's a mic right there by him, but
Yeah, I was wanting to bring. I thought it'd be a good idea if we could just adopt the NFPA 58 regulations and make that the standard without the inspections, because it is a long and drawn out process to get these tanks put out in the field. when inspections are required?
Yeah, what he's talking about an inspection, the board voted in a previous meeting to allow 420s. You know, it had been the history of the board that they would not allow a 420 to be set up next to the building per pamphlet 58. And every other state in the nation allows this. And so a few years ago, the board voted to allow this practice to happen, but an exception would have to be given by the inspector and the local authority having jurisdiction, which for the most part is the local fire department for that district, would have to sign off on it as well. And since that time, there have been several 420s that have been set out, but we have gotten several requests to suspend with the exception, adopt the rule per 58, and allow our class 1 dealers to set 420s per pamphlet 58 alone without the need of an exception or involving the so I think that's the request that he's bringing, and that's the exact same request that Jim Bertram was going to bring on behalf of SunGas up in Damascus. And like I said, this is if you took a poll, I would say the overwhelming majority would ask for this consideration as well.
Do anyone have any questions for Mr. Worley while he's in front of the board in this regard?
This is Drew. Are we talking about only vertical tanks or 120? Of course, you know, 120 is the same as a 420,
Yeah.
but a horizontal?
Horizontal or vertical, you know, ASME or DOT. The NFPA 58 states anything under 125 water gallons. And they don't specify vertical or horizontal. So either or I think would be fine.
Okay. That's all.
We just have a real high demand for smaller tanks, especially in the area that we work. The Bella Vista area is just a real high demand area for tanks that size, for fireplaces and ranges. So we deal with it a lot. And the paperwork issue is, it slows us down quite a bit. And it would make the process a lot faster if we can just stop the 58 regulation.
Understood.
Any other questions for Mr. Worley? Okay, thank you for presenting that to us today and for our consideration. And Kevin, I believe you may even have, is that the only two that we had on the docket for the day?
That was the only ones that was dealing with 420-pound cylinders. And Jack, I don't know, did Bob tell you that this is going to be part of another discussion that we're having today that deals with the waiver issue?
Yeah, he did say so.
Okay, all right. So I think if everybody is good, if the board is good and doesn't have any more questions for Jack, then we can turn him loose and we can bring Steve Aarons into the meeting so he can make his request.
Okay, if that's the case, you could go ahead and ask Steve to come in.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Okay, Steve, can you hear us okay?
Okay, thanks, Jack.
All right, Paul, Steve Aarons, the director of the Arkansas Propane Gas Association, is with us.
Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay, hey, well, thank you for putting me on the agenda. My part today is just kind of a quick.
Steve, can you hear us okay?
I can, yes. Turn that on, see if that helps.
Okay, thanks, John. Paul, Steve Aarons, the director of the Arkansas Propane Gas Association, is with us.
Can you hear me,
Kevin,
Kevin?
we just lost your voice.
Yeah, we lost it.
Okay, well, thank you for putting me on the agenda.
Hang on just a minute. Steve, can you hear me?
I can, yes. I can hear you, Kevin. If that helps.
Steve, your video is delayed from your audio, and it's causing some issues. If you would,
We just lost
you
your
would mute your mic for just a minute.
Okay, well, thank you for putting me on the agenda.
Hang on just a minute. Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Steve, could you please mute your audio? Steve, your video is delayed from your audio. Okay, I have got Steve muted. I don't know what's going on with him. Is everybody else, are they able to hear me clearly now without feedback or?
Yes.
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 Okay. Okay, so I think the issue was coming from Steve, and it seems like there's a delay.
Am I in?
Hey, Steve,
Hello?
Steve Aarons, can you hear us? Okay, one more time. Steve, can you hear us? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute him, and I'm going to try to get him, gentlemen, if you'll indulge me just a minute. He had a substantial request of the board that we need to hear, and I don't know what's going on with him, but I can get him to call our conference phone, and I think we'll be able to take care of business that way. Does that sound good to you, Paul?
Yes, sir. See if we can get him on an audio call.
Am I back?
Steve, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, well, hang
Sounds
on.
good now.
Yeah, you're sounding good now, and everybody can hear you. I was fixing to call you on your cell. Paul, if you would, go ahead and address Steve.
Steve, would you go ahead and tell us why you're before the board today and your idea of our suspension of fees and registrations to take care of this statute in our code book of our accruing balance of revenue?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. At the last board meeting, I knew that you were talking about a grant program for installing bulk storage and tossed that around with my board and then a survey of our members. And most of the marketers out there, in fact, I think every member marketer that we had thought a better idea would be to waive the fees as provided in the existing statute. I think the grant program is well-meaning. I think there's some operational hurdles there that probably would require a way to reduce your fund balance. It would appear to be is the legislative remedy that already exists, which is to waive those fees. So on behalf of the board and the members of the Arkansas Propane Gas Association, our request is that the LP Gas Board enact that. Not sure how you enact that, but waive fees for a year as provided by law.
And Steve, it would just take a simple motion and a vote to do that. That is a statute that is already in our regulation. Paul, do you want me to go through that statute with the board?
Yeah. Any of the numbers that you have on what that means to the fund as far as our revenue goes and how that will affect us going on and that type of thing.
Okay. I think that I sent the actual statute to all the board members, and it simply reads discretionary suspension of inspection and registration fees. if the balance of the liquefied petroleum gas fund reaches $500,000, the liquefied petroleum gas board shall have the discretion to dispense with all inspection and registration fees for a 1-year period. At the expiration of the 1-year period, if the balance of the fund is below $500,000, the board may reinstate the inspection and registration fees. Okay, so that's been a statute for many, many years. And so let me just give you a quick shot at what that would mean as far as the financial situation with the board. Okay, so if can you all see that screen? Can you see that number 1.849? I called DFA yesterday and I got our exact cash on hand as of yesterday, and it's 1.8 million, a little over 1.8 million. And you can see that at some time in the recent past, it was as high as 2.6. And then we've got funds that are moving in and funds that are moving out, depending on revenue that's being deposited and expenses. But the snapshot of yesterday was 1.849 and change. All right. So if we just took a look at if we had enacted this last year, that's the last data that we have, and we're just 2 months into our fiscal year. So this is pretty current information. For FY 22, we had total receipts or total revenue deposited in our fund of $666,737. Our total expenses for FY 22 were $443,268. All right. So when you look at what that means, registration and inspection fees, if you all can see this, everything in red depicts a registration fee or an inspection fee. And this spreadsheet you're looking at, this is from the closing book that we just turned in July. Fiscal year is half a year, then we have unearned income that has to be posted in the right fiscal year. So we provide this spreadsheet for them to do this. So that makes it very easy for us to go back then and pick up these numbers. What we're looking at as far as an impact is $320,217. Okay. So we saw our revenue, we saw where our fund balance was, we see what the impact would be, and it's just a simple calculation. The fund balance is 1,849. The revenue for fiscal year 22 was 666,000. The inspection and registration fees that we collected were 320,000. The operating expenses were 443,000. So using FY 22 as a bench, 96,748. The target for the statute is 500,000. So if you subtract that 500,000 from the cash on hand, that puts it at 1.3. You divide that by 96,000 for that example for last year, and you'll see that it will take about 14 years to draw it down to $500,000. So you can see that considering this is not it's not an issue. This is a doable proposition. Any
Kevin,
questions?
when was that statute put in place for 500,000? Seems awfully low for an operating expense when our, to draw down to a $500,000 balance when we're at 443.
Well, and Paul,
1977, 1997.
okay, it's something that we need to consider, and I haven't followed up on this. There was either somebody at E&E that I was just, or they might feel that DFA would like to see this rather than a year of operating expenses. They would like for each agency to have a couple of years in reserve. I don't know exactly. I need to call over to DFA and find out what the recommendation is there. But this is statute, so that would require a change to statute to increase that amount. If we went a couple of years, then we would still be looking at 7 or 8 years. And Shane, did you raise your hand?
I did. I was just going to tell you that I think both Larry and I had made that suggestion. That's what the state typically likes us to have is 2 years worth of operating expenses and reserves. So you and I had a conversation. I think you had a similar conversation with Larry as well, that
Okay.
you may want to look at statutorily increasing the $500,000 threshold that's in there to at least 2 years worth of operating expenses.
Okay. All right. But that would have to, but that's the only way that can be changed, right? Is through the legislature, because this is a statute.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. And as you recall, you and I had this, we have our deadline to turn. So that's really why I wanted to listen into this discussion to see if that was something that, and Secretary Keogh's here as well, because she'd be the one requesting it from the governor's office if that's what your board wanted to do. So that's one of our outstanding possibilities of legislative changes that we're just wanting to see what you all as a board, what your thoughts are, what your recommendation is. And with the fact that knowing that, at least 2 years of operating expenses and reserves is kind of a more clear benchmark than whatever the statutory, I think $500,000 that was adopted in the 90s. So.
Okay. All right. So Paul, that as far as the request from the association and the impact it would have, and were you able to hear the recommendation that Shane was making, Paul?
Yes, it was a little warbly, but I put it together.
Okay. So I'll hand it back to you for any additional questions. Oh, wait a minute. I think Steve and you and Shane have got to cut me some slack here. I can't tell if the hand up is you got a question or if you're telling me to stop talking. I don't know.
No, I just, my comment would be, I don't believe that the association is asking the LP Gas Board to get its fund balance down to $500,000 or less. I think we'd like to see 1 year and see how it goes. I think there are other opportunities for the board, even discussed just a little earlier on this call, to look at adopting, updating the codes and regulations, maybe adopting 5854 as the statewide code, things like that, that would have a cost and an expense. And I think the board the industry would support that. There's an awful lot of the existing code that dates back to like 65 or so. So it might be time to spend some time and look at that. So $500,000 just for the LP Gas Board to waive the registration fees and inspection fees as allowed by law for at least a year and see where we're at.
Well, Steve, we do appreciate you showing us a viable option for what we were trying to do with the grant. And I think the idea was, this money sitting in a pool and not being essentially used. Let's get it back in the industry, and we need to come up with more innovative ways of putting that money to work in Arkansas. And that's going to be the burden of this board, to try to find new and inventive ways that will help our industry and help our employees and help our customers in the state in general. So I appreciate you giving this to us as an option. We probably may or may not have found that. So that was a good option. Are there any other questions that the board members have for Steve while he's in front of the board?
No.
Okay, would someone consider a motion? And in doing that, if y'all are ready to form a motion, in doing that, just to help formulate that a little bit, we do begin our fees and permit structure on January 1st. So it would need to remain in place through the end of the year, so we don't have to send out bills that we wouldn't get into, again, a refund type situation.
We're just looking for 1 year. So what I'm getting.
Yeah, and that's what the statute calls for, is 1 year. So it-
2023.
yeah, if you made the motion to go ahead and suspend, per the statute in our code book, the suspension and inspection fees, to commensurate on January 1, I think,
Oh, my.
Joe, would that be a proper motion?
I believe it would. I mean, the statute, it simply says that the suspension has to be for 1 year. I don't see anything in the statute say will of the board, and understanding the logistical issues y'all have stated you would have if you started it immediately. I don't believe that would be an issue.
Steve, a January start date to go along with our permit renewal, would that be acceptable, you believe, to the association?
I think that sounds the best way to move forward, frankly. It gives you a little time to get things in order, a little notification to folks, and yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, and
Oh, my.
Paul, I think, Charlie, do you have something that you would like to?
I would, Mr. Director, as well as Mr. Chairman.
Okay, please speak up.
I'm going to scream.
There you go.
So I'd like to get some further insight from Mr. West as well as from Mr. Curry. I'm looking at this statute, and I agree. It says that if the fund reaches 500,000 or more, the board has the discretion to dispense with all inspection and registration fees for a 1 year period. Which I think everybody is of the same mind. That's what it says, and that would be the intention. The concern that I've got is the next line that says, at the expiration of the 1 year period, if the balance of the fund is below $500,000, the board may reinstate the inspection and registration fees. So the question I pose to Mr. West and Mr. Curry is, as well as the board, what happens if you're not below that $500,000? Is that a limiting line? Can you reinstate the inspection fees?
Or we.
If you're not below 500,000, which according to this chart, you're not going to be.
Right.
Is that a problem? Is that an issue? Mr. West, Mr. Curry, what do you think?
Charlie, I think you're exactly right, which is why we went into the discussion with Kevin, or I went into discussion with Kevin about maybe changing the threshold legislatively, because I think once you embark on this, it's hard to reinstate those fees clearly under the statute, the way it's written now.
Right. So we're presupposing that the legislature is going to go ahead and allow the board or E&A to raise this limit. Would it be more prudent to get a legislative change first and then entertain the idea of suspending these fees? Or does the board, and you know, what's the opinion of Mr. West, Mr. Corey, about moving forward at this juncture? Is it premature, I guess is what I'm positing at this point?
Charlie, the only other thing I'll add to it is, if we're looking at a legislative change, in addition to the threshold, we could also look at changing that so that the statute would read what we're really intending to do, or what the board, it appears the board wants to do, and that is you suspend it for a year, and then we amend the statutory language to say it's automatically reinstated unless waived again by the board. I mean, that's the benefit of this discussion for our legislative deadline, to see what changes we may want to make to the statute based on the concerns you've raised with the current wording and amount.
Okay, I just wanted to lay it out there for the benefit of the board as well as everybody on the call, that once the die's cast, you're going to have to do additional things in order to just have this be for 1 year potentially, because otherwise you're going to have 14 years before you ever get below $500,000. Anyway, that's, as some of my other colleagues would say, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Question, this is David. When is our deadline for submitting this to the legislative?
As a part of the Department of Energy and Environment. So as a package coming from the board through the department, our deadline is, it has to be approved by the secretary and submitted tomorrow to the governor's office. So our deadline with the governor's office is tomorrow under the current administration. That's not to say that there wouldn't be maybe other opportunities. We all know there's a gubernatorial change coming, but the current deadline for any department package bill is tomorrow. And that's the only thing we know for sure. Which is, like I said, why we're kind of listening in, so that if we needed to be prepared to draft some legislation, office tomorrow.
Well, if we're gonna do it, I think we need to let y'all get busy.
Steve, have you got a?
I'm wondering if it would be simple enough just to strike that last sentence the first sentence gets you where you need to be. It retains the ability to waive those fees to the board, and you eliminate that last sentence. So you have a little more, you can throttle that amount without that last sentence being sort of the cap on it.
Shane, Joe, Charlie, what do y'all think about what Steve suggested?
Just to make sure I understand what he suggests, he's just suggesting that we remove the last part or delete it so that the board would waive it for a year at a time. Is that
Correct.
The essence of what he just said? Yeah. I think that's definitely a viable option.
Yeah, that seems like that would be a quick way, a quick remedy if we are needing to get something over to the governors, by the end of the week. But just that's a good recommendation to consider. But I think what the board needs to understand or know that, Shane, if they choose to do this, in your opinion, we got to get
our discretion. It's not.
There's time to do it.
There's time to do it, but if you enact it today, and that's y'all's prerogative, right? But if you enact this change today and our legislation doesn't make it through for some reason, then you're back to Charlie's point that until we change it. But now the good news is you have a legislative session every 2 years, so you actually have 7 more bites at the apple before you. Just trying to get everybody on the same page. So.
Okay.
I may be reading, as someone actually, I'm not a lawyer, but could I read this 1575-111? Would anyone like to actually hear what that says?
Yes. Have you got it there? Or do you want me to read it, Paul?
You can. If the balance of the liquefied petroleum gas fund reaches $500,000, the Liquefied Petroleum Gas Board shall have the discretion to dispense with all inspection and registration fees for a 1-year period. At the expiration of the 1-year period, if the balance of the fund is below the $500,000, the board may reinstate the inspection and registration fees. So it's still at our discretion whether or not we enact on this anyway.
Charlie, that would be right.
That's correct. But I think
so it's not a mandatory deal that we're up against the wall on this $500,000 balance. We have to do something today. Don't feel like we have to. I just wanted everyone to be able to hear the statute.
The only thing that's up against the wall today is a proposed legislative change to go to the governor's office tomorrow. That's maybe we're mixing and matching, but that's the only deadline we have is if we want to propose a statutory change, the deadline to do that to the governor's office, to submit it to the governor's office, is close the business tomorrow. And I think the way that it's currently or potential pitfalls that we all want to be on the same page.
Shane, and to Paul's point though, if the board voted to enact this today, then and so it went into effect January 1 of 2023. At the board meeting in December of 2023, the board could vote to reenact or put the inspection fees back in place if they so desire.
No.
I don't believe that's the way. If you read it in totality, I think Charlie's point is right. Once you do it, it's waived for a year, but in essence, it's continually waived until you hit the $500,000.
Okay, do you understand
I
that?
agree with Charlie on his Charlie, and that was Shane, wasn't it?
That was.
Both of their
Correct.
interpretations, I believe, is right. What I was getting at, this is discretionary. Don't feel like we have to do this today. And the other thing I was sitting here thinking about, Kevin, of that roughly 320,000, not that it makes any difference really, but maybe just, do you have an idea about what that ratio is?
The impact to the state from the 320,000 is going to be roughly, there's 200 and some $1,000 of it that are tied to registration and inspection fees that are out of state. The direct impact to Arkansas is going to be about $94,000. And like you said, that's just information, but I don't.
Does anyone have any other questions? Or would anyone like to formulate a motion? Or do we need to table this till next year?
Well, with Shane offering, and he's the guy to get it done. I think at the very least, Paul, it might be good to go ahead and initiate a change in this. We still have another board meeting prior to the end of the year that this can be addressed. We weren't going to start it until January 1 anyway. So am I thinking correctly here, Shane, that we go ahead and let's try to get something over to the governor? Go ahead.
Fix the statute?
Fix the statute, and then we can come back at our next board meeting and motion to act on this.
The next year.
For next year, and
We
still
still
get
need
it,
to do it next
still
year.
get it at the beginning of the year, correct?
That's what I think we need to do.
I like that better.
Yes,
Personally.
it's much better.
All right. Paul, I guess that then if you'd like to ask to entertain a motion to get with legal and formulate a to change the statute legislatively. Or
That's what we need. Do we need a motion for them to go forward with that?
yes, so Joe, what would be a proper motion for what we're talking about?
So, not to interrupt you, but I think the motion that I'm looking for from the board is, and I think the simplest way that somebody said earlier is deleting the last portion of the last sentence is probably the easiest and most straightforward way of fixing it right now. But it would be basically a motion for the LP Gas Board to recommend this as a legislative change that would then go to Secretary Keogh, who's listening to this and understands the issue and is obviously going to support whatever you all say at this moment, to put in the legislative package for the Department of Energy and Environment.
All right, you good with that, Joe?
No, I concur with Shane completely on that.
All right. So does somebody need to state it exactly like Shane said, or can they say ditto?
They could say, I make that motion.
Y'all couldn't hear.
And I will second it. This is David.
And I believe that we've lost our chair. I was waiting for him to say all in favor, and I looked up and he's gone. This is the beauty of technology. Joe, am I out of bounds? Do we need to wait to get him back to make everything?
I think he's back.
Hang on.
He needs to get still.
All right, Paul, can you hear us?
I can, I got interrupted there, so.
Okay, the next thing you need to say is all in favor. We've had a motion made. David has seconded it. And were you listening when the motion was made?
No, I wasn't. I was disconnected.
Okay, the motion was made to make a change in the statute to allow the board to get done what they wanted to get done. And that motion was made by Terry McCulley, and David Remy seconded it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes.
All right, so the intent is to be able to enact this and do it in a way that that would allow for a period of time, and it wouldn't be ambiguous. Steve, is that acceptable to the association?
Yes, I think that was a good discussion, and I appreciate your willingness to engage on that. Yes.
Absolutely. We appreciate you. Okay, Paul, what's your pleasure here, Mr. Chair?
Moving forward.
All right. Steve, appreciate you being with us and helping with this issue, and look forward to working with you going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
You bet. We'll talk to you.
Okay, is there any other visitors that have anything, or do you have anything, Director?
There's no other visitors here. We can move on with the agenda. We need to go over the financial report. Let me get that. Let me get that up. Okay, is everybody able to see this? Wanted to quickly run through our last fiscal year. We haven't met since the end of the last fiscal year. Just want to run through this. I'll remind the total of those expenses through the end of the fiscal year were $443,268. The revenue that we deposited for the year were $680,000, $623,000. And then you can see the previous year, FY21, the comparison, 414 on expenses and 658 on revenue. Does anybody have any questions concerning the last fiscal year? Okay, if not, I'd like to we've had 1 month in FY23. Our appropriation is $455,629. In the month of July, we had expenses of $58,396. We had revenue of $12,992.50. And you can see the comparison to last year for the same time period. 1 month, $52,863 and $18,198 revenue deposited. Does anybody have any questions concerning the first month of this fiscal year? I would like to remind all the board members that anytime anybody has a question, wants to see expenses, you can go on it's not transformation. Andrea, what's the website that it's called?
Transparency.
Transparency. I'm sorry. I had old timers. Transparency. ArkansasTransparency.com, and you can go to our agency and see those, or you can call here anytime, and we can provide that information to you. If nobody has any questions at this time, Paul, I would like you to entertain a motion to accept the financial report. Mr. Chair, are you with us?
Could I have a motion to accept the financial report?
Terry, motion.
Second?
Second.
David Remy seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right, Kevin, if there was also a request for us to look over the 61 form and ask for a request in a change on the form dealing with venting. Kevin, would you go over that since you got control of the PDF?
Yes, and I hope that everybody got this yesterday. We've had a request to make a change to our LPG 61. Of course, everybody knows that this is the form that we use to ensure that the systems that are out there in the state of Arkansas are leak-free. We had some wording on this installation report in the highlighted box that is displayed there, and it referred to making sure that venting is properly done. The request that we've had is to make this a proactive question, and there would simply be a box with the word yes, and it would necessitate the serviceman to check that box saying yes, the venting is properly installed.
I believe this, Kevin, we talked about this earlier. I remember a request from Federated Insurance back years ago when I was renewing that they wanted something with the venting. I'm wondering if that's not what he's trying to get covered in this one form instead of having to do a separate form for this.
That could be, Drew. Can you shed any light on this request? Do you have any?
I mean, it's a good idea. Another thing, on another note, a customer brought this to my attention here recently. Actually, it wasn't a customer, it was a contractor to new construction. He said, it does not need to say customer name or customer signature, because I can tell you that on 98% of the time of the new construction leak check, it's a contractor. Does that make any difference? You understand what I'm saying?
I do. I don't know. I'm just trying to think what percentage of to me, the contractor would be signing on behalf of the customer. They're saying this is, so until somebody occupied the residence, would the contractor not be the customer?
Well, not necessarily. Because if the customer is building their own home, I mean, I see what you're saying. But it's only been brought up once or twice. It makes sense.
I guess what about registered agent? I mean, would that, I don't know, throwing a term out there, if we could customer or registered agent.
Yeah, or he actually said a perfect term for it, and I cannot remember it. That's been about 4 months ago. And I cannot remember.
Do you remember who said it?
It was a guy. Yeah, I can get a hold of the guy.
But yeah, if you have, if, get a hold of him and see if you can, if we have another term that needs to go on the form, this would be a time to do it. And I'll just let you all know that if you all vote to, that this is okay, that you want to do this, rather than destroy current inventory, we will make a roll and change to the 61 unless you otherwise directed. And so we would make the change the next time that we order. And the box that is designed for the customer's name would be there. But all right, so let me ask you something, Drew. So you've got a contractor that signs this, and then you have somebody else that occupies the house.
Correct.
Would that not be a change in ownership?
Well, this is just my thinking. The contractor signed it, and what I do usually whenever I'm on the job, after the contractor signs it, I put it in the cabinet drawer. Well, what if something happened and the actual homeowner said, "Well, I didn't sign that." That's
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm thinking at the end of the day, the 61 that needs to be turned in on a residence would need to be those that occupy it. That's just my opinion. But now we're full up with legal people, so they can chime in, and I would ask them to do that.
Well, I'm not trying to make mountain out of nothing, but Kevin, it is sometimes very hard to get the customer out there because, hey, I got to work. So and so will be there. I mean, it's a rarity that the actual homeowner is there.
Usually it's somebody 18 years old and it ain't the customer, especially like a late check or something.
All right, Terry. Terry's trying to say something, but he's just saying it to me. Speak up. We're letting hear you too.
Usually it's just someone 18 years old, especially because everybody's at work. I mean, both parties work, the man and the wife. So you may have a neighbor, you may have. It's over 18, but I mean, he's right. It's very rarely that it's the customer, unless it's a brand new tank set, and that's it.
Yeah, because if it's not a new construction and it's somebody been servicing for 20 years, 100% of the time it's the homeowner or a child that lives there with the same last name.
So,
just my thoughts. I'm just a peon.
Oh, I'm sorry, Shane, you got your hand raised.
Well, I was going to say, listening to your discussion, a lot of times we use the term like customer or authorized representative for a lot of forms on other entities within energy and environment. So customer or authorized representative, we sometimes use that in several of our different forms.
That'd be perfect.
That was the wording that I was going to say, was authorized representative.
Yes.
but I'm with you. I mean, if we're gonna make changes, now's the time to do it. If we're gonna make this and that. So
Sure.
I think it needs to be changed.
All right, Chair, it's back to you.
Is he still with us?
Could I get someone to formulate a motion concerning both of these changes to the 61 that you would like to get done?
I'll make a motion that the yes box for venting needs to be put on the new 61 and also authorized representative for signature for signage.
Could I get a second to his motion?
I'll second.
Terry seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
Uh,
Any opposed? Well, Kevin, how much backstock do you have there?
Well, they're actually, we're having trouble really keeping up. Rachel, have we got some that have yet to be delivered, or do we have everything that we're owed from the
We
printer?
have everything that we are owed, but I just placed an order just for 100.
For 100 more, okay. So, these things are going, guys. What kind of inventory do you all have in your trucks? Well, I know you're good, but
45.
45, all right, how many? About that, Terry?
50, 75.
50, 75. So we've got about 175 tablets to work through. There's 25 tank sets on a tablet. Is it 20 or 25, Rachel?
25.
25.
First of the year.
Yeah, I would say, no, probably before then. I mean,
Well,
we're right in the middle of tank setting season. There are some people that are just getting after it. So I think this could be, to come into play pretty quick, y'all.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The next thing, Mr. Chair, are you ready for us to move on to the next topic on the?
Absolutely. Let's go and revisit the 420.
Yeah, this is going to be part of that whole discussion. Okay, so in the email that I sent out, I sent the language of our code book that has to do with waivers, and that's part of the request that was brought before the board earlier, and we need to take a look at this. If everybody has that in front of you, let me see if I might have that. No, I don't have it. I don't have it. If you would, hang with me for just a moment. Everybody is familiar with the ability of this board issuing waivers. Most of them are distance exception waivers. And let me give you a backstory about what brought this about. On your screen, if you can see that, there is a picture of an installation, and they're hard to see, but there are two 250-gallon tanks that are located in a little alley between these two buildings. And it's obvious that they do not meet the distance requirements of our code book. And so there has been a waiver that has been issued for these two tanks to be located there. They've been there for years. And it was commonplace that a distance waiver was issued by the inspector on location, subject to a request of a dealer. In the agency for years, all right? And if you look at how the rule is actually worded, it says waiver. To the extent permitted by statute, where the application of a code rule would be unreasonable under the facts of the particular case, and safety may be obtained in other ways, the board may, upon adequate showing by the person affected, grant exemption or modification of the rule complained of under such requirement as will secure a reasonable condition of safety, provided such exemption or modification be not in conflict with the law. The word that is used there is board. I think that the thinking previously has been, by extension, that means the director and the inspectors, and that's how the board operated. When you go back and you read where a waiver is cited elsewhere in our code, and that was also sent out to you guys in that PDF yesterday, it has to do with issuing a waiver for bulk storage, and it gives that ability to the director. So that kind of takes that thinking out of obviously board is not meant to be the director or the inspector, because it would not have cited director separately in the code book, if that makes sense. All right. So basically where I believe, and I've discussed this with Nia Mafus, and I think that she agrees. I've also visited with Shane and with Charlie on this, and Joe, I don't know if Nia had an opportunity to visit with you about this, but everybody agrees that the waiver members of the board and not the director or the inspector. So just having made that statement, everybody can see what a problem we have, right? Okay. And so when I said that the 420 discussion is going to be part of this, it's part of it. Now you all, or this board, through motion and the ability to issue waiver, gave that ability to the inspectors for, in the case of two situations, poultry houses and with the 420s. So there are a couple of different ways to go about to rectify this. But you brought this to our attention. It has to do with some tanks in the downtown area of Jasper. And Jasper is not by itself. I mean, we've got constructed, 100 years ago, and waivers have been made over the years. Some of these, I suspect, were just verbal only. They called an inspector. Inspector went out there. They said, "Hey, I can only get 3 feet." They said, "Yeah, roll." And I say I suspect that. I can't go back and and say 100% that's what's going on here. But this rule, now this is not a statute, this is a rule, but it needs to be dealt with in such a way that the board feels comfortable. A couple of ways to do this is to rewrite and promulgate a rule that gives narrow discretion to board employees or a representative of the board to issue a waiver, something with language that would allow that. Another way to do it is that when a waiver is issued, it is done as a recommendation by the representative of the board, and every one of them are brought before the board for your motion and vote. That could look as simple as between our last board meeting and this board meeting, there were 5 waivers that were recommended by the inspectors. Those are sent with the agenda package. You're able to review them. A motion is made at some point to accept the recommendation, those waivers. The board does this and we move on. And I visited with Charlie a little bit about this. Am I presenting that as we discussed?
You are.
Okay. So I would invite, and Paul, I'll just let everybody know that NIA has made a request to the board that you all discuss this, you be aware of this. You talk about the different ways that you could handle this, what you're comfortable with. But she made a request that a motion be made to table this discussion until our next meeting where she could be with us. So wanted you all to know that. And Shane and Joe, if you all want to jump in and offer your counsel here to our board members, please do that.
Kevin, I'd like to say something here. Moving forward, what has to start happening for sure, and you mentioned to me in our discussions that there are actually some verbals out there that aren't recorded, and that can't continue to happen. That needs to be recorded, and we need to know from a liability standpoint. I think any of the owners or operators or managers even that are sitting on the board, that you would want to know without a shadow of a doubt if something legally came up with either loss of property, loss of life, or something, that you would have that exception rule written somewhere where, yes, there was definitely an exception and here it is. And not that helps particularly the situation, but it helps limit the liability of those involved.
Right. And Paul, to that point, since I have been the director here, we have an electronic form, and that form has been used for every distance exception that has been granted by a representative of this board. And until a remedy is finalized and you all are comfortable, we can add verbiage to that electronic document that turns that from a waiver to a recommendation. And it would just be language that said, pursuant to approval by the board. And we can put that on that electronic document. But from 2016, from the fall of 2016 through now, we have documentation of every waiver that's been issued. I just don't know that I can say that that's been the same case in the past.
Well,
Terry, you've been here. Were there times when waivers might have been issued by just the inspector going out and looking at it and saying, you're approved, go ahead?
Yes,
Okay.
there's some, they're out there.
Okay, so Terry believes that there are some that are out there that has been the case, where a class 1 permit holder has requested the inspector come on site, look at an installation, and then just give a verbal approval to move forward.
well, it sounds like we have further discussion with this. Is it Ms. Malthus that would like to be with us when we continue with this rule and not an exception verbiage? So let's do that. Let's table that. And guys and ladies, I would ask you to think about that when we're, between now and our next meeting, that if you have some other discussion that you'd like to bring forth or something that we need to cover underneath the rule and not exception waiver, then be prepared to do that at our next meeting.
And Paul, if you would allow, I would just like to demonstrate or show where the 420 that discussion would come into play. If you look back at this narrow alley, and then you look at what NFPA 58 allows, they allow as many as 420-pound cylinders to be located in close proximity to each other. Now, the legal distances for a 420, some container that is filled on site, like an ASME, a 420 ASME container, they're different than a DOT cylinder. A DOT cylinder, the requirement from windows and entrances for ground level are 3 feet and 5 feet from sources of ignition. With cylinders that are filled on site, it's 10 feet from sources of ignition. But what this does allow is for a 420-pound cylinder to be set up against the building within 10 feet of another cluster. And so adopting what Jack from Ozark was requesting, if that was adopted, then it takes the exception out of play and it becomes the standard. That's a direction that the board would like to move in, something that gets away from exceptions. We know at some point there might need to be some flexibility for the majority of what's going on out there. When safety is the issue, we want a standard rather than an exception, I would believe. If you cannot achieve a 10-foot distance between these two that are located up close to a building, then you must come out 25 feet for your cluster of tanks. Is designating the distance requirements for 420. And you can see that an ASME vessel has to be 10 feet from a source of ignition, such as an air conditioning unit, whereas a DOT cylinder around the other side of the house only has to be 5 feet. They both have to be 3 feet from any kind of space opening. And that was the real concern with this installation here. This building is probably well in excess of 100 years old. It's one of the stone buildings that you see in an old quaint town. It has got a basement and there are several openings. And, this is what brought it to the attention and started this discussion. So Paul, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, it looks like we just need to table the motion. And so if we could have I guess there's really no form of a motion. So if we'll just table this to the next meeting and again, just be thinking about any additional things that we'd want to include in the waiver discussion and how you would feel about the board um, reviewing each one of these, or if we give a limited discretion to the inspectors to go ahead and formulate those with good documentation, those waivers in the field on the fly. And then, if there need to be special approval of something, then we go forward. But the 420 rule, I see viable for us to get that as the rule and not the exception. I hate exceptions. There's no need in it when we have a viable solution like this, and the other, states across the country are using this as their basis.
Right.
Paul, question, this is David. Would it be in order for Kevin to be working on some of this wording to help us along in our next meeting of how we might want to think about wording this?
Yeah.
Regarding the rules?
Absolutely. David, that's a good point. And Kevin, would you mind, you doing the same? I think we all need to be thinking about how we want to go forward with this. We all want timely. These installations can be very timely, time sensitive, and even to the point of in a day or two need to make a decision. So we need to think about that too. And we all want our cake and eat it too. In that respect, when we're dealing with customers and dealing with installations, we want the customer and take care of the issues timely. So, but we want to do it safely also.
Well, just for the board, I think we've got, I'm glad that Shane is online with us, that Joe's online with us, that Charlie's in the room. We can certainly sit down and put together language and get that over to Joe and Nia and see what they think about it. And so at the next meeting, we'll be prepared to have something for you all to consider. And while we're working through it, we can communicate. There's nothing that would prevent us from sending out a language and just for you all's consideration. And so when we meet next time, there could be draft language that everybody is on board with. And
well, I think that would be very helpful to do all that and then share it back with the board. And then we could still maybe have some input before it's all finalized.
Okay, so we'll table that motion, and through your directive, Kevin, if you would help us get with Shane and the others on the energy board to help us maybe formulate a good path to go.
we will do that. Okay. We got two more things left on the agenda. Are you good to move on? Is everybody okay to?
I am. The next on the docket is referring to the grant discussion, and I suppose everyone saw the results of the survey that were not favorable in respect to us using some of those funds that we were discussing earlier for a grant, possibly for some storage and or facilities here in the state. So I personally consider this issue done, and maybe it's not even spending more time on it. It sounds like we've got some other viable options on what we can do with those monies. And I talked with Kevin earlier about this on being a little bit more diligent with coming up with some more programs, more aggressive with programs for CDL and hazmat training, possibly to promote an environment for better drivers, maybe even have something in concurrence with the 40-hour school. I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a very difficult time finding drivers and even possible candidates because they don't have any of those three: 40-hour or hazmat. And what we end up doing is cannibalizing the industry by me going after your driver and you going after my driver. We don't like to consider that, but we know that that happens sometimes, and that causes stress in the industry. So we need to come up with better ways of of developing these employees that we're going to need to, safely deliver propane in the state.
Yeah, and you all, I think that Paul had some good ideas there, and there, it's very beneficial for us to be under the umbrella of E&E with something like this, because the experience that they have working with employees just as an entity, and attracting employees can be beneficial. This is a problem that is, I don't know how many phone calls I get a month just talking on the phone and saying, hey, I can't find drivers. I can't get drivers, employees. It's just, and we're not the only one. We're not unique, but we know that there are hazmat. We have there are hazmat drivers out there. They have their CDLs. And other entities to something that we just discussed. I don't know if it's not possible for the hazmat people. It's either the state police or I'm not sure which entity is responsible for issuing CDLs and hazmats, if it's the state troopers or if it's the state police. But have them come over. Let's have a day where we just invite people to come. Anybody that's needing to get their hazmat. Come to the building and let's put it on for them. I don't know what that possibility is. It's just an idea, and then let's introduce them to the oil and gas industry. And
anything else before we move on to the next? There's no motion needed for this because there's. I just feel like on the grant discussion, it's pretty much dead. So if you want to move on to the next thing, Kevin was giving me a report about the governor approval of the tank pickup.
That's where that rule currently is with promulgation. The next thing would be to get the governor's approval back. And just wanted to give you an update on that. That is all that I have. There is one other thing before we go that I want to share with everybody, but as far as agenda items, that's all I have.
Anything else additional from the board? Any thoughts or concerns?
No.
I got one.
Okay, Terry McCulley would like to.
Any way we can all be in person next time?
Absolutely.
I mean, I know y'all are, everybody's busy, but we've got a lot going on this next one, Paul.
I don't have a problem.
It was present.
Well, and that'll be good because that will be the.
That's right at Christmas.
Right. Be the last one. And Terry said that if everybody will come to the building, he'll wear antlers, right?
I ain't going that far.
Hey, Paul, before everybody leaves, I would like to just share something. This came from Neil Pretty down at Seba Gas. He sent me an email following our safety training the other day, and he spoke about that a little bit. I wanted his input on how that went. But then he took the time to share this about one of our employees. He said, also wanted to let you know that we, Seba, appreciate Terry Barnes. Whenever I call him, if he doesn't answer right away, I get a return call within a few minutes. He has done a great job clarifying some rules for me and my team. It helps us tremendously when we can call someone and get a straight answer quickly. He also does a great job of communicating with us and being on time for inspections and trainings. He respects our time and is evident by his promptness. So, and then he went on to say, I know that it is usually just complaints that you all get, so he wanted to do that. But I wanted to just share that because I know that, I don't know how much Terry paid him to send that. But it's always good when our employees get a pat on the back. So I wanted to share that with the board. And with that, Mr. Chair, if you would like to entertain a motion to adjourn, unless there's something else, I'm done.
Do I hear a adjourn?
I'll move.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I, all in favor? Kevin, when's the date on the next meeting?
It'll be the first, Rachel, do you know off the top of your mind? I can't, it's either the first or the second week in December.
Okay.
So we'll, and that's at the discretion of the chair. I'll share with you the tentative date, see if that works for you. And then we'll get that out.
Sounds good.
All right. I appreciate everybody. Hope you all have a blessed rest of the day.
See you.
Thank you.
Just